My name is Sari van Poelje. I'm the director of Intact Academy and Team Agility. From Team Agility, we help businesses innovate more quickly than their products and become agile in a turbulent environment. In Intact Academy, we organize training programs for coaches and consultants to help businesses innovate. You can find all this information on the websites www.intactacademy.com and www.teamagility.com. In the previous blog, we talked a bit about what happens to an organization in crisis and what is actually a crisis. We call a crisis a space in which the dynamics are stronger than the cohesion, so that the boundaries get breached. When a boundary gets breached, one of the first things you have to do is establish a different leadership style. Now, leadership is not only a personal gift, as it were, but it's also a cultural contamination, if you want to say it that way. So in Holland, for instance, where I live, we have more or less a democratic leadership style where everyone thinks they have something to say and to decide. What happens in crisis, though, is you need to re-centralize because you need to reestablish first the major internal boundary. First, you need to reset the leadership, then the membership, and then deal with the environment. That's the order of play in crisis. To be able to do that, you have to switch into a directive leadership style. Now, there's a lot of myths about directive leadership styles, and people confuse it a lot. Directive leadership styles, autocratic leadership styles. And there is a difference. So for me, an autocratic leader is someone who is strictly top-down and believes in absolute leadership. So autocratic leadership styles are based on what we say in TA, negative critical parent locks into negative adapted child. So you see that often in sex. You see a very strong autocratic leader. The public relations word for that, which people like more, is charismatic leadership, but actually it's the same thing as an autocratic leadership style, but then with a better PR. So so autocratic leadership. And the autocratic leader is someone who closes all boundaries and creates absolute dependency between leadership and membership. That's not the same as a directive leadership style. So in a directive leadership style, the way to do it, in my experience, now that I've done this crisis management for 35 years, is a directive leader creates hope, direction, and love, if I want to say it in an existential way. And I'll translate that into business speak. So a directive leader creates hope in the sense that they create a point beyond the crisis. So what's really important for a directive leader to do is to say, there is hope beyond the crisis, and this is where we're going to go. So of course you have to deal with the immediate crisis, but the leader that's directive has an endpoint, which is beyond the crisis. The second thing is they create structure. And the directive leader is the holder of the structure. So they reestablish those major internal boundaries, then the major external boundaries. They manage the cohesion in the leadership, then the cohesion between members and leaders, and then the relationship with the environment. And the third thing a directive leadership does is love. And by that, I mean that they create this belief that everyone belongs together in crisis. So a really good directive leader will say one for all and all for one, certainly during times of crisis. And they will create that atmosphere of being in it together. And when people feel they're in it together, they come up with unusual solutions in which people are beautifully human and compassionate and helpful to each other. And that's the type of leadership that we're looking for. Of course, there's also a technical side to that. Technically, what you also have to do is you have to create very short communication lines and very short decision lines. So short communication lines means there is immediate and constant communication about what's going on. So the more information, we say adult information, you give to all the members of that system, the more you help them take responsibility and accountability for whatever they need to do within the crisis. There's nothing, and that's also one of the differences between autocratic and directive leadership. Autocratic leaders tend to give false or no information during crisis, where really good directive leaders give constant information and frequent information, which is accurate, because the emphasis is on everyone taking responsibility. The other thing, of course, is short decisional lines. Well, how do you create that? Well, one of the really important things during crisis is that you create a crisis team. And the crisis team are the people who are most necessary to deal with that particular crisis. It doesn't mean necessarily that you follow the hierarchy. It means that you involve the people in a very small group who are necessary to deal with that particular crisis, and that you give that team directive power and executive power during the crisis. One of the things we see during this corona is the differences in how countries deal with this virus. And one of the really interesting things for me as an organizational consultant is how they establish leadership during this time. If I compare, for instance, in terms of decision-making, the Netherlands, France, America, you see completely different styles. China, even. So in the Netherlands, what's really interesting to me is that they've established this directive, quick decision-making crisis team with people who are experts. The experts in politicians are very closely linked, and they haven't involved people who are usually in that hierarchy that are not necessary. Very important, very well done. They give constant and clear and adult information about what's going on in the country. Everybody knows and can look up who's ill, where they have to go, what they have to do. In Holland, the government has decided, and this is really how do you create this autonomy of membership? They've decided to put in place regulations and ask for the population to take responsibility. Every time the population doesn't follow the regulation, they tighten them. So that means that there's this interplay between members and leaders about accountability. Very important to establish in a crisis, because a crisis team which only creates top-down autocratic leadership will create dependency. And the more dependent people are, the less innovative they are in finding solutions. So in Holland, more than in other countries, you see that people find very creative solutions and unusual partnerships to deal with this crisis. And I really believe it's because the government has decided to do this short directive leadership, quick decision lines, good communication, and then this interplay of accountability, which is so important in directive leadership. So to recap, directive leadership is not the same as autocratic leadership. You need to create hope, love, and direction. You need to create short decision-making lines and clear adult communication so that you can establish an interplay of autonomy and accountability.